a huge controversy has erupted over Hershel Walker in Georgia, a very ugly controversy. His son, Christian Walker, who's been on this podcast, weighing in. And there are some people who think it's very bad for Hershel Walker's chances in Georgia. And this, of course, would mean that virtual communist Raphael Warnock would have 6 more years, a kind of almost a nightmarish prospect, something that's made even more nightmarish occurring in a red state. Now, I'm going to talk in more detail about all of this tomorrow because I want to go into some of the details of it, but I'm not going to do that here. Here I want to take a broader view of what's happening with the U.S. Senate. Now, first, let me say that I think the issue in Georgia is not Hershel Walker's behavior. Rather, it is, do we, and by we here I mean Georgians, but also Americans, do we want someone as far left as Raphael Warnock to be representing a red state and perhaps tipping the balance or keeping the balance for the Democrats in the U.S. Senate? Think about the long-term implications of the Democrats having Senate control, implications for a Supreme Court, implications for so many other things. So very difficult for us as Republicans to keep our eye on the ball. We're often sort of trapped into this, our candidate has moral failings, we've got to pull out our long knives and sort of stab him ourselves. Democrats would never do this. If Raphael Warnock did exactly what Hershel Walker did, exactly the same, the left would A, laugh it off, dismiss it, poo-poo it, ignore it. And second of all, even more audacious, they would turn around and accuse the publications that talked about it of racism for going after a black man and a pastor. How dare you? So look at the difference in psychology between the two sides. And Georgia could, in fact, end up determining control of the Senate. Now, there is a pathway for Republicans to take the Senate and have narrow control. By narrow control, I mean 51, maybe 52 seats, even while losing Georgia. The good news, and I'm looking for good news on this day with all this very unfortunate and ugly controversy involving the Walker family. But in Wisconsin, the Senate seat looks like it's going to go to Ron Johnson over Mandela Barnes. Johnson was behind, but he's now pushed ahead. Barnes is being flayed for his positions on defund the police. I think that Johnson is going to win this seat, so that's not something we have to worry about too much. In Ohio, I think J.D. Vance is looking pretty good. Interestingly, now in Pennsylvania, Dr. Oz, who was trailing badly behind Fetterman, some Democrats thought we've already got Pennsylvania in the bag. Fetterman, by the way, is a horrible candidate, not to mention the fact that after his stroke, you can barely understand what the guy is saying. He sounds even worse in some cases than Biden. But Oz, I think, is finally hitting his groove. He has moved into a statistical tie with Fetterman. It's not saying much because Oz should be 20 points ahead. But I'll take a narrow victory by Oz because that's a critical state, and that could be the one that gives Republicans the control of the Senate. In Arizona, Blake Masters is running behind Mark Kelly. Mark Kelly, of course, puts on the kind of astronaut outfit, and so many of us who were raised at a time when the first man stepped on the moon, we've got this kind of dewy-eyed view of astronauts, the same way that many of us had a dewy-eyed view of the FBI, derived from movies like The Untouchables. We've got to realize that there are astronauts and there are astronauts. I mean, there are astronauts, and then there's Mark Kelly. And this guy is a left-winger, but he's a left-winger in an astronaut's costume, you might say. So I'm hoping that this gets out. And of course, it is Blake Masters' job to get it out in Arizona, help Arizonans to see what's happening with Mark Kelly, because that, I think, is a winnable seat for Blake Masters, even though the polls show, for whatever they're worth, that he is running significantly behind right now. Same story in Arizona, where Bolduc, the the retired Army guy who has the Republican nomination, appears to be in an uphill fight for the Senate seat in New Hampshire. And New Hampshire, by the way, even though it's trended Democrat in recent years, it is a state that can go either way. It used to be a more conservative state. It was a conservative-leaning state when I was a student at Dartmouth in New Hampshire. But what's happened is that New Hampshire has gotten a lot of immigrants, you might say, immigrants from Massachusetts, some from Vermont, and these blue newcomers to New Hampshire, over the past few decades, have colored the state more blue than red. Now, all this is a way of saying that this is a very close call in the Senate. I think Republicans are feeling pretty good about taking the House. I hope they do it by a decisive majority. But it's also very important to win the Senate. And this is the case where if I were Georgian, I would put aside any anxieties about what Hershel Walker did. Athletes are not exactly known as moral exemplars anyway in these areas. And so the issue is not Hershel Walker's human failings. It is what kind of a person, what kind of a set of beliefs, what kind of votes do we want from the senator who is elected in Georgia?